From the NewsChannel 5 network, this is Inside Politics.
Hello, everyone. I'm NewsChannel 5's political analyst, Pat Nolan. Welcome to Inside Politics. The 2020 U.S. Census is complete. The final numbers were released a couple of weeks ago. Now it's up to local and state officials to take those numbers and adjust congressional, legislative, city council, and school board districts to reflect those population changes. In Metro Nashville, that job goes to the city's Planning and Codes Department, more specifically to Greg Claxton, who's overseeing the effort here for Nashville-Davidson County. Greg's our guest on Inside Politics. Mr. Claxton, welcome to the program. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Let's begin our discussion. For those who may not be familiar with this process, why do we have to have these lines redrawn? Is it required by law?
Yes, it definitely is. Redistricting is kind of the routine practice of redrawing district boundaries, typically every 10 years. It's something that's been going on in the U.S. for pretty much as long as the U.S. has been a country. It's at the federal level, it's required by the Constitution. Locally, it's required by both the Tennessee state constitution as well as the Metro Nashville charter. The key idea, particularly in the charter, is that you want to draw district lines in a way that people have equal representation, so that one part of the county isn't underrepresented in terms of the number of council members who represent them compared to another part of the county. Redistricting
is tied to the census. Is that the best tool we still have available to measure our growth and changes in population patterns?
It is, definitely. So there's a lot of things that the federal government does and private companies do to sort of try to keep track of population change, demographic shifts, that kind of thing. But almost all of them come back to the census, which is what the Census Bureau does every 10 years to get out and try to enumerate and actually count everybody in the country. It is a Herculean effort. It is, just a tremendous effort to get out and get kind of a snapshot on April 1st every 10 years of kind of where people are throughout the country. It is a massive, massive undertaking, and there is nothing else that we do in the country quite like it.
The legal concept behind redistricting is one man, one vote. So every person's vote, as I think you mentioned, carries about the same weight as everybody else. It comes out of a Supreme Court decision that actually originated out of Tennessee. Tell us a little bit about that particular case.
Sure. So that's Baker v. Carr. It's from the early 1960s. And there it was, kind of the issue was Tennessee had a law in the books for a number of years that district lines had to be redrawn every 10 years, the way they do now. And the state just hadn't done it for 60 years, I think. And so someone brought a case and kind of sued and took it all the way up to the Supreme Court on the basis that a resident of some rural counties, their votes counted about 20 times as much as residents of some urban counties. So there was such influence in terms of how that person was being represented by their elected officials. The Supreme Court ruled in favor of that and sort of established what we now know as the one person, one vote principle.
Some people have said over the years that perhaps doing the census every 5 years might be better. We have tools to be able to get that a little bit more concisely. That may seem a little strange since this year you're actually getting the numbers late because of the pandemic and because of some legal actions that went on with the previous administration. Because you're late, are you going to have any problems getting these lines redrawn and approved? We have a school board elections coming up next year, and I think they're in August, but the qualifying deadline is much earlier than that.
It is, and we're very mindful of sort of the practical deadlines that we have. We don't anticipate any issue with the school board election next year. Every other cycle, we have a very short turnaround for the council districts. So in 2011, we got the data in March and had to be ready for the qualifying deadline in May. And we were able to get that done through the use of new GIS tools. So certainly, like with the school board election next August, we don't anticipate any problem.
There are always complaints that census numbers are wrong or underreported. How do you feel about the Nashville numbers you've seen so far in terms of their accuracy?
Sure. So one thing I'll say is that it's very preliminary right now. We're getting started doing the redistricting process, and that's kind of taking our attention. As we go forward, as we work with the numbers on, for redistricting, we'll obviously be keeping an eye out for discrepancies, things that seem off, things that seem undercounted. I will say right now, before the census data came out, we had our eye on what's called the American Community Survey. This is the thing that the census does every year to give states and cities in the country a view as to how their areas are changing in between the 10-year census. That's a survey, it's a sample, it's not the same level of rigor as the Census Bureau. If you kind of take those numbers and look at what you would expect from 2017, 2018, 2019, and project into 2020, you wind up looking somewhere in the area of maybe 694, 697. We came in at 715. So at first blush, like, we came in higher than where Census thought we were previously. So that doesn't suggest to me that there's an undercount. Now, obviously, like I said, as we work with the data more, we'll keep an eye out, and we'll be looking for sort of areas where it might be off, misrepresenting what we understand about the county, or miscounting the people. But right now, they don't seem, at first blush, they don't seem worrisome.
We might tell or remind the audience that the census numbers are important for more than just drawing legislative lines for school boards and councils or on the state or federal level. Lots of federal and state monies are tied and based on population that are required or reported by the census, so there's some big dollars potentially riding on exactly how accurate those numbers are.
That's right. So nationally, I looked up a figure. The U.S. government distributes something like $1 trillion throughout the country based on census data in one way or another. And that's stuff like transportation spending, healthcare, housing, food, education. Like, it shows up in so many different areas that the federal government is interested in how many people are there and sort of pushing resources to follow kind of where people are. So it is tremendously important and in so many different facets.
Looking around Nashville, it's pretty clear from the cranes and everything else that's going on the streets that we've had quite a bit of growth in the last decade. How does our growth compare from 2010 to 2020 as compared to what we saw in the 2010 census?
Sure. So it's definitely the case that growth has picked up a little bit. Nashville has traditionally been a pretty steady grower. From 2000 to 2010, we grew by about 11 to 12%. That ticked up a little bit from 2010 to 2020 to a touch over 14%. So it's not way out of bounds from where we were, but it's picking up a bit for sure.
Greg Claxton is our guest. He's the person in charge here in Davidson County from the Metro Planning and Codes Department to handle the redistricting of Nashville after the 2020 census. Back to continue our conversation after you watch these messages. Stay with us.